The emergency meeting at Sterling Energy was supposed to be routine final preparations for the global product launch. Instead, chaos erupted when the central generator died, plunging everything into darkness. Senior engineers panicked. No one dared promise a fix in time. Jack Carter, a maintenance worker, stood quietly in the corner, observing. CEO Olivia Sterling, 34, beautiful, powerful, and notoriously arrogant, turned to him with a mocking smile. "If you can fix that generator before 2 o'clock," she said, her voice dripping with challenge, "I'll kiss you right in front of everyone. Deal?" Olivia Sterling had inherited more than just a Fortune 500 energy company from her father. She'd inherited his ruthlessness, his perfectionism, and his belief that emotion was the enemy of success. At 34, she commanded boardrooms with the same cold efficiency that had earned her the media nickname, the Ice Queen of renewable energy. Her blonde hair was always pulled back in a severe bun, her designer suits impeccable, her expression unreadable. She graduated from Harvard Business School at 25, taken over 3 failing energy startups by 30, and transformed Sterling Energy into a renewable powerhouse worth $12 billion. But beneath the polished exterior lay wounds that had never healed. Her mother had taken her own life when Olivia was 16, unable to bear Arthur Sterling's endless affairs and cold indifference. Olivia had found her mother's body in the bathtub of their Manhattan penthouse, pills scattered across Italian marble. A note that simply read, "Love is weakness." From that day forward, Olivia had built her life around a simple principle: never let anyone close enough to hurt you. Romance was a distraction. Marriage was a business merger. And people like maintenance workers? They existed in a different universe, one that barely registered in her consciousness. Jack Carter's universe revolved around a 7-year-old girl named Ellie. At 36, he possessed the kind of rugged handsomeness that came from actual work, rather than gym memberships, broad shoulders from lifting, calloused hands from fixing, crow's feet from squinting at circuit boards under harsh fluorescent lights. He'd once been Lieutenant Colonel Jack Carter, head of engineering for the Army Corps, designing power grids for forward operating bases in Afghanistan. He'd had a promising career, a beautiful wife named Sarah, and plans for a big family. Then Sarah had left him a note shorter than Olivia's mother's. "I can't do this." She'd walked out when Ellie was 6 months old, leaving Jack with a baby, a broken heart, and a choice. He'd chosen Ellie. The military career ended. The 6-figure salary disappeared. He took contract maintenance jobs that let him pick up Ellie from school, help with homework, tuck her in every night. His world had shrunk from international deployments to a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, from commanding hundreds to answering to supervisors half his age who couldn't tell a capacitor from a resistor. But when Ellie looked at him with those green eyes, Sarah's eyes, and called him the best daddy in the world, he knew he'd made the right choice. Every sacrifice was worth her smile, every missed opportunity justified by her laughter. She was brilliant. His Ellie, obsessed with robots and circuits, always asking how broken things could be fixed. "Just like people," she'd once said with startling wisdom. "Sometimes people break too, but that doesn't mean they can't work again." Jack had hugged her tight that day, wondering how a 7-year-old understood what adults often forgot. Their first encounter had happened 3 weeks before the generator crisis, though neither would have called it memorable. Jack had been called to the executive floor to fix an electrical short that had knocked out half the overhead lighting. The in-house electrical team had spent 2 hours examining blueprints, arguing about building codes, calling manufacturers. Jack had arrived with a toolbox and 20 years of experience. He'd found the problem in 10 minutes, a corroded ground wire hidden behind a marble panel. While the senior engineers debated solutions, Jack had quietly fixed it. The lights had come back on just as Olivia Sterling had stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking against marble floors like a countdown to execution. She'd been on her phone, negotiating a merger worth hundreds of millions, when she'd noticed mud on the marble tracked in from the parking lot where Jack had walked through a puddle to reach the service entrance. Her voice had cut through his concentration like a blade. "You there? Maintenance." She hadn't looked at his face, hadn't seen the way his jaw tightened at being addressed like furniture. "My Tesla has mud splashed on the driver's side. Take care of it." Jack had set down his tools slowly, deliberately. He'd turned to face her, and for just a moment, their eyes had met. She'd expected defiance, maybe anger. Instead, she'd found something else, a quiet dignity that made her uncomfortable. "I'll clean it with the cleanest hands available," he'd said, his voice carrying an odd emphasis on the word cleanest. She'd already dismissed him from her mind, returning to her call as she walked away. Later, reviewing security footage while investigating a separate issue, she'd seen him in the parking garage. He'd spent 15 minutes meticulously cleaning her car, not with the quick spray and wipe job she'd expected, but with the careful attention of someone who understood that how you do small things reflects how you do everything. She'd also seen him afterward, sharing his lunch with a homeless veteran who lived near the garage entrance, sitting with the man for 20 minutes, listening to stories about Vietnam. She told herself it didn't matter. People were either useful or they weren't. Jack Carter was maintenance, useful for fixing things, nothing more. Yet something about his deliberate care, his quiet kindness when he thought no one was watching, had lodged in her mind like a splinter she couldn't quite remove. The morning of the product launch had started like a military operation. 200 journalists from 30 countries were gathered in the main auditorium. The demonstration required perfect timing, a synchronized display of Sterling Energy's new solar panel grid that could power an entire city block from a surface area the size of a basketball court. The investors alone represented $60 billion in potential contracts. The Department of Energy had sent a delegation. 3 senators were in attendance. Everything depended on the massive generator that powered not just the building's regular operations, but the entire demonstration grid. At 11:30, in the middle of the final technical review, that generator had died. The failure was catastrophic and inexplicable. The generator was only 2 years old, Swedish engineered, with triple redundancy systems. The senior engineering team, 15 men and women with advanced degrees from MIT, Stanford, and Caltech, huddled around diagnostic tablets, their voices growing increasingly panicked. Minimum 6 hours to diagnose, the chief engineer announced. Another 3 to implement repairs. Maybe 4. Olivia stood at the head of the conference table, her knuckles white as she gripped its edge. 9 hours meant the launch would fail. The journalists would leave. The investors would withdraw. The senators would remember this embarrassment when Sterling Energy sought federal contracts. Her father would call it proof that women couldn't handle real pressure. Jack had been in the building's mechanical room, fixing an HVAC unit, when his supervisor called him to the boardroom. They needed all hands. Even maintenance, to at least look like they were doing something. He stood in the corner, tool belt around his waist, studying the chaos with the same quiet attention he'd once used to assess damaged infrastructure in Kandahar. Unlike the engineers focused on their tablets, he walked to the window and looked out at the generator housing. He noticed something they hadn't: a pattern in the exhaust venting that suggested the problem wasn't electrical but mechanical. A specific type of mechanical failure he'd seen before in the field, when sand had clogged similar systems. "It's the pressure relief valve," he said, not loudly, but with enough certainty that the room quieted. The chief engineer laughed. Actually laughed. "The relief valve? That's your expert diagnosis? You're a maintenance worker, not an engineer." Jack shrugged. "I've seen this exact failure pattern before. In Afghanistan, different generator, same Swedish manufacturer. The valve fails, creates a cascade shutdown. Looks electrical, but it's not. I can fix it." The laughter spread through the engineering team. One of them, a young MIT graduate named Preston, was particularly vocal. "You're suggesting that our entire engineering team missed something a janitor spotted? That's absurd." Olivia watched this exchange with growing frustration. The clock on the wall showed 12:45. In 75 minutes, she would either triumph or face the kind of public humiliation that ended careers. She studied Jack's face, the calm certainty, the lack of ego, the way he didn't flinch under the ridicule. Her father had taught her to read people like financial statements. Jack Carter wasn't lying or grandstanding. He believed he could fix it. "How long?" she asked, cutting through the laughter. 90 minutes, Jack replied. "Maybe less if I can access the right parts." The engineering team erupted in protests. Olivia raised one hand, silencing them. Then she walked across the room until she stood directly in front of Jack, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and cold, like winter roses. "Let me make this interesting," she said, her voice carrying the kind of dangerous sweetness that preceded hostile takeovers. "You claim you can fix what my entire engineering team cannot. Fine. If you succeed, if that generator is running before 2 o'clock, I'll kiss you. Right here. In front of everyone." She paused, letting the absurdity of the offer sink in. A CEO kissing a maintenance worker. The scandal would be delicious. "But when you fail," she continued, "you're fired. No severance. No reference. Nothing. Do we have a deal?" The room went silent. Everyone waited for Jack to back down, to admit he'd overstepped, to apologize and retreat. Instead, he looked at her with those steady brown eyes and said something that would replay in her mind for months afterward. "I don't care about your kiss, Miss Sterling, but my daughter has a robotics demonstration tonight at her school. She needs the lights to work. I'll fix your generator because it's the right thing to do. That's the only deal I need." Jack walked out of the boardroom without waiting for permission, heading straight for the generator housing. He shed his outer work shirt, revealing a white t-shirt underneath that stretched across shoulders built by actual labor. His movements were economical, purposeful, a man who'd learned efficiency in places where wasted motion could be fatal. Inside the generator housing, the problem was worse than he'd anticipated. The pressure relief valve hadn't just failed, it had triggered a cascade of secondary failures throughout the system. The diagnostic panels showed error codes the manual didn't even recognize. But Jack had seen worse. He'd once restored power to a field hospital using salvage parts from 3 different generators while under mortar fire. He started by bypassing the main control system entirely, a move that would have horrified the engineers watching through the security cameras. Using tools from his personal kit tools he'd carried through 3 combat zones, he began rewiring the auxiliary circuits to create a temporary bypass. His hands moved with the muscle memory of 20 years, stripping wires with practiced precision, creating connections that existed in no manual but worked in the field. Sweat began to soak through his shirt as the temperature in the housing climbed. The generator was fighting him, every safety system trying to prevent exactly what he was doing. But safety systems were designed by people who'd never had to choose between perfect and functional when lives were on the line. In his mind, he wasn't in a corporate generator housing. He was back in Kandahar, middle of summer, 120 degrees, trying to restore power to a medical facility full of wounded civilians. Except this time, the life on the line was smaller, more personal. Ellie had been working on her robot for 3 months. She'd named it Helper because, as she'd explained with 7-year-old seriousness, robots should help people, Daddy, not hurt them. She'd programmed it herself using the coding books Jack had bought with money saved from skipping lunches. Tonight was her first demonstration, and she'd made him promise to be there by 6. To sit in the front row where she could see him, to watch her prove that a motherless kid from Queens could be just as smart as anyone else. The engineering team gathered in the security office, watching Jack work through multiple camera angles. Their mockery gradually faded to confusion, then to grudging interest. He's creating a parallel circuit using the emergency backup capacitors, one observed. That's actually brilliant. Completely against protocol, but brilliant. Preston, the MIT graduate, was furiously checking his tablet. Those connections he's making, they're not random. He's essentially building a temporary generator within the generator. How does a maintenance worker know how to do that? The chief engineer remained silent, watching Jack's hands move with the kind of precision that couldn't be taught, only earned. At 1:53, Jack made the final connection. For a moment, nothing happened. The generator remained silent, dead, a $12 million piece of scrap metal. Then, deep within its core, something stirred. A low vibration, almost below hearing, like the first heartbeat of something massive coming back to life. Jack placed one hand on the housing, feeling the rhythm, making minute adjustments to his improvised circuits. The vibration grew stronger, steadier. At 1:57, the generator roared back to life, not with the smooth purr of normal operation, but with the determined growl of a machine forced back from the dead through sheer will. Lights flooded back throughout the building. Computer screens blinked awake. The demonstration grid in the auditorium hummed with power. In the boardroom, the engineering team stood in stunned silence. Someone started clapping slowly at first, then others joining, until the entire room echoed with applause. Except for Olivia. She stood frozen at the window, watching Jack emerge from the generator housing. His white t-shirt was now soaked with sweat and stained with grease. His hands were black with oil. He looked exhausted, depleted, like a soldier after a battle. But he didn't look up at the boardroom window, didn't look for her approval or acknowledgement. He simply pulled out his phone, checked the time, and started walking toward the service exit. "Who is he?" Olivia asked quietly. Her assistant quickly pulled up Jack's file. "Jack Carter, contract maintenance worker. Started 3 months ago. Previously..." "Oh," the assistant paused. "Previously, Lieutenant Colonel, Army Corps of Engineers. Numerous commendations, including a Bronze Star, resigned his commission 4 years ago for personal reasons." Olivia read between the lines. Personal reasons in military files usually meant family. She watched Jack disappear into the stairwell, presumably heading to clean up and clock out. An hour ago, she'd seen him as barely human, just another replaceable part in the corporate machine. Now, something had shifted, creating an uncomfortable dissonance she couldn't name. The product launch proceeded flawlessly, but Olivia found herself distracted, her eyes constantly drifting to the service entrances, looking for someone who'd already left. She found Jack in the parking garage, loading his tools into a battered Ford pickup that looked older than some of the interns. He changed into clean clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt that made him look like every working-class stereotype she'd been taught to look down upon. But there was something in the way he moved, careful and deliberate, that spoke of dignity earned rather than inherited. You left, she said, approaching him with the click of heels that usually announced her authority. The launch isn't over. He continued loading his tools without looking at her. My part was, generators fixed. My shift ended at 2. The dismissal stung more than it should have. People didn't walk away from Olivia Sterling. They waited for her to dismiss them. About what I said earlier, she started, the words awkward in her mouth. The promise I made. Now he looked at her, and she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not desire or expectation, but a kind of weary amusement. You mean the kiss? That was for your engineers, wasn't it? To make them feel small. To remind them that even their failures were worth more than my success. The accuracy of his assessment left her momentarily speechless. He continued, his voice calm but firm. I've met people like you before, Miss Sterling. People who think everyone else exists just to reflect their importance. But here's something you might not understand. I don't need your validation. I don't need your kiss. I fixed your generator because it was broken, and I knew how to fix it. That's all. He started to get into his truck, but something pride, curiosity, or perhaps the unfamiliar sting of being dismissed made her grab his arm. The muscle beneath the flannel was solid, real in a way that nothing in her corporate world ever was. Wait, she said, hating the uncertainty in her voice. You were right. About the valve, about the solution, about why I made that offer. But you still surprise me. In my world, nobody turns down an advantage, even a ridiculous one. He looked at where her manicured hand rested on his working-class arm, the contrast sharp as a metaphor. In my world, he replied, advantages aren't given by people like you. They're earned by showing up every day, doing the work, going home to the people who actually matter. The words should have angered her. Instead, she felt something else, a pull, like gravity shifted. Before she could stop herself, she raised up on her toes and pressed her lips to his cheek. Not the theatrical kiss she'd promised, not the power move she'd threatened, but something smaller and more honest. His skin was rough with stubble, warm, real. He smelled like honest work and Old Spice. Nothing like the calculated cologne of the executives she occasionally dated for appearance's sake. Thank you, she whispered, the words foreign on her tongue. For saving the launch, he pulled back, studying her face, as if seeing her for the first time. I didn't do it for you or your launch. I did it for Ellie, my daughter. She needs to know that when things break, we fix them. We don't give up. We don't make excuses. We fix them. As he drove away, leaving her standing alone in the parking garage, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced since finding her mother's body, the vertigo of realizing the world was larger and more complex than the narrow corridor of power she'd inhabited. 3 days passed before she saw him again. He was in the lobby, fixing an elevator panel, when she returned from a board meeting. Their eyes met across the marble expanse, and she expected what? Acknowledgement? Interest? Instead, he simply nodded, the way one professional acknowledges another, and returned to his work. The dismissal burned. She started noticing him more after that. The way he ate lunch alone, but never looked lonely. The way younger maintenance workers came to him with problems, and he'd teach rather than just fix. The way he kept a photo of Ellie in his wallet, worn from constant handling. She overheard him once on the phone with her school, patiently explaining that he couldn't attend a midday parent conference because he couldn't afford to lose the hours, but could they possibly schedule something before 7 in the morning? A week after the generator incident, she made a decision that surprised even herself. The company was hosting its annual charity gala, $500 a plate, black tie, the kind of event where money pretended to care about causes. She had her assistant deliver an invitation to Jack personally. The invitation came back the next day, politely declined, with a note. Thank you for the invitation. Unfortunately, I have a prior commitment. My daughter and I have a standing Friday night date pizza and a movie. I'm sure you understand. She didn't understand. People killed for invitations to this gala. But for Jack Carter, pizza with a 7-year-old mattered more. That Friday night, she found herself driving through Queens, past Jack's apartment building. She saw them through a pizzeria window, Jack and Ellie, sharing a pepperoni pizza, the little girl gesticulating wildly about something while Jack listened with complete attention. He laughed at something she said, and the transformation was remarkable. The weariness lifted, the weight of single parenthood momentarily forgotten. He looked young, happy, free. The next Monday, she went to the maintenance office during Jack's lunch break. He was sitting alone at a metal table, eating a sandwich that looked homemade, reading what appeared to be a technical manual. Is this seat taken? She asked. The other maintenance workers froze, watching their CEO in a designer suit worth more than their monthly salaries standing in their break room. Jack looked up, surprised but not intimidated. It's a free country, he said, which wasn't exactly an invitation, but wasn't a rejection either. She sat down, her designer bag looking absurd on the scratched metal table. I wanted to apologize, she said, words that had literally never passed her lips in a professional context. For the kiss comment, it was demeaning. You deserve better. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, but it was full of unspoken questions. Finally, she asked the one that had been bothering her most. Why didn't you come to the gala? It could have been good for your career. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Miss Sterling, I've had a career. I've had success, recognition, all of it. None of it meant anything when my daughter woke up crying for a mother who wasn't coming back. The only career I care about now is being Ellie's dad. The honesty was brutal in its simplicity. She found herself telling him about her mother, words spilling out that she'd never shared with anyone except therapists, bound by confidentiality. About finding the body, about the note, about spending 18 years proving that love was indeed weakness. Jack listened without judgment, without the fake sympathy she'd encountered from others who'd learned her story. When she finished, he said simply, "That must have been hell. But you're wrong about one thing. Love isn't weakness. Love is the only thing that makes us strong enough to survive the worst life throws at us." That conversation changed something between them. Not friendship exactly, not romance, but a recognition of shared damage and different responses to it. She started finding excuses to be in parts of the building where he worked. He started looking less surprised when she appeared. They'd talk about Ellie's school projects, about energy policy, about everything except the growing tension between them. The crisis came 3 weeks later. Arthur Sterling made one of his rare appearances at the office, ostensibly to review quarterly reports, but really to remind everyone who truly owned the company. He noticed Olivia in the lobby, talking to Jack about Ellie's upcoming science fair project. The conversation was innocent, professional even, but Arthur saw something in his daughter's face that triggered every alarm in his controlling mind. He waited until Jack left, then pulled Olivia into his office. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice carrying quiet menace. "That maintenance worker. I've seen how you look at him." Olivia straightened, the childhood instinct to obey warring with adult indignation. "I don't know what you're implying, but Jack Carter is an employee. Nothing more." Arthur laughed, cold and knowing. "Don't insult my intelligence. I've seen that look before. Your mother had it once, before she learned what the world was really like. That man is beneath you, Olivia. Literally and figuratively. End it now, whatever it is, before you embarrass yourself in this company." The worst part was that he was right about the look. She did look at Jack differently. She looked for him in crowds. She thought about him at night in her empty penthouse. She wondered what it would be like to be loved by someone who'd choose pizza with his daughter over networking with billionaires. But Arthur Sterling's daughter didn't get to want those things. "There's nothing to end," she told her father, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Jack Carter is maintenance. I'm CEO. We exist in different worlds. But worlds have a way of colliding." The next evening, Olivia stayed late, trying to lose herself in spreadsheets and projections. The building was nearly empty when she heard a child crying. She followed the sound to the maintenance office, where she found Ellie curled up on the break room couch, tears streaming down her face. Jack was kneeling beside her, his face etched with worry. "Hey," Olivia said softly, not wanting to intrude but unable to walk away. "What's wrong?" Jack looked up, exhaustion and worry, making him look older. "Ellie's sick. Fever came on suddenly. I couldn't leave work. I've already used all my sick days for her school events. I had to bring her here." Olivia looked at the little girl, flushed with fever, clutching a stuffed robot to her chest. Without thinking, she knelt beside Jack, placing a hand on Ellie's forehead. The child opened green eyes so like the mother who'd abandoned her and whispered, "Are you the pretty lady Daddy talks about?" Jack flushed, mumbling something about kids saying silly things, but Olivia felt something crack in her chest. She made a decision that would have appalled her father and thrilled her mother. "Come on," she said, helping Ellie sit up. "My car has better air conditioning. Let's get you home." The ride to Queens was surreal. Olivia Sterling, CEO, driving through working-class neighborhoods in her Tesla. A sick child in the back seat. A maintenance worker beside her giving directions. Ellie fell asleep halfway there, her fever breaking, mumbling about robots and angels. Jack carried her up 3 flights of stairs to their apartment, and Olivia followed, entering a world she'd never imagined. The apartment was small but immaculate. Ellie's drawings covered the refrigerator. A half-built robot sat on the kitchen table beside homework, carefully checked in Jack's handwriting. It was a home in a way her penthouse had never been. She stayed while Jack put Ellie to bed, sitting on a couch that had seen better days, looking at photos on the wall. Jack in uniform, younger, prouder, unbroken. Jack and a beautiful woman on their wedding day, both glowing with hope that hadn't yet been betrayed. Jack holding baby Ellie, his face transformed by a love so pure it hurt to witness. When he returned, she expected awkwardness. Instead, he made coffee instant, not the artisan blend she was used to, but somehow perfect in its simplicity. They talked until 3 in the morning about everything and nothing, about dreams deferred and loves lost, about the weight of being responsible for someone else's happiness. "Your father will destroy you if he finds out you were here," Jack said as dawn painted the queen's sky gray. "He's already warned you about me, hasn't he?" She nodded, too tired to lie. "He says you're beneath me, that people like us don't mix with people like you." Jack smiled sadly. "He's right, you know. We don't belong in the same world. You're caviar and champagne, I'm pizza and beer. You're boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. I'm overtime and payment plans. Your world would eat me alive, and mine would bore you to death." But he'd been wrong about that last part. Nothing about Jack Carter bored her. The science fair was the following Saturday. Olivia arrived in jeans and a sweater, clothes she'd had to buy specifically for the occasion. Jack's double take when he saw her was worth the fashion crisis. Ellie practically glowed, dragging Miss Francois on. Olivia to see her robot, explaining in elaborate detail how it could sense obstacles and navigate around them. "Just like people should," she said with 7-year-old wisdom. "When something's in your way, you don't give up. You find another path." The robot won second place. Ellie was ecstatic. Jack lifted her onto his shoulders, and for a moment, Olivia saw what family could look like when it wasn't poisoned by power and betrayal. Arthur Sterling was waiting in her apartment when she returned. He'd had himself let in, of course he had a key. He owned the building. The confrontation was brutal in its efficiency. "I know where you were," he said, holding up photos from a private investigator. "A science fair. With him. With his child. Have you lost your mind?" She wanted to rage, to fight, to defend. Instead, she felt tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying someone else's expectations for 34 years. "What are you so afraid of?" she asked. "That I'll be happy? That I'll choose something other than this cold, empty success you've built?" "I'm afraid," Arthur said with devastating honesty, "that you'll end up like your mother, destroyed by believing someone beneath you could love you for yourself rather than your money." That maintenance worker doesn't see Olivia. He sees sterling energy, sees opportunity, sees a meal ticket for him and his daughter. The words hit their mark because they echoed her own fears. How could Jack Carter love someone who treated him like furniture? Who'd offered to kiss him as an insult? Who represented everything he'd walked away from? "You're right," she told her father, the words ash in her mouth. "It was a mistake. It won't happen again." But promises made in penthouses didn't hold in the real world. She tried to avoid Jack. But the building wasn't that big, and hearts weren't that obedient. He knew something had changed. The warmth in his eyes cooled to professional courtesy. The easy conversations ended. When Ellie called the office from school, asking if Miss Olivia could come to her birthday party, Jack gently redirected her, his voice carrying a finality that broke something in Olivia's chest. She threw herself into work, into deals and mergers, in the kind of success that looked good in Forbes, but felt empty at 3 in the morning. 2 months passed. 2 months of seeing Jack from a distance, of noticing the deepening lines around his eyes, the way he'd lost weight, the way he no longer smiled even when Ellie called. She learned from overheard conversations that Ellie had been asking about her, that Jack had run out of gentle explanations for why Miss Olivia had disappeared. She learned that he'd been looking for other jobs, wanting to leave Sterling Energy, to remove himself from her orbit entirely. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked Thursday. She'd been leaving late, exhausted from another 16-hour day of being her father's daughter, when she saw them in the parking garage. Jack was carrying Ellie, who was clearly sick again, her little arms wrapped around his neck. His truck wouldn't start. She could hear him trying the engine, the grinding sound of a vehicle that had given its last. He set Ellie down gently, opened the hood despite the rain, trying to fix yet another broken thing, with nothing but determination in calloused hands. She watched him for 5 minutes, this man who'd fixed her $12 million generator but couldn't afford to fix his own truck, watched him shield Ellie from the rain with his body while he worked, watched him finally admit defeat, pulling out his phone to call a taxi he probably couldn't afford. She made her choice then, the kind of choice that changes everything or nothing, depending on your courage to follow through. She walked over, her heels splashing through puddles, her designer coat immediately soaked. "Get in my car," she said, not a request but not quite an order either. Jack looked at her, rain running down his face, and she saw his pride war with his daughter's needs. Ellie coughed, a wet, miserable sound, and pride lost. They drove to Queens in silence, except for Ellie's occasional coughs and mumbled observations about rainbow oil puddles. At their building, Jack carried Ellie inside, and Olivia followed without invitation. She helped him get Ellie into dry pajamas, made tea with honey for her throat, sat beside the bed reading from a robot book, while Jack called the clinic to schedule an appointment he'd pay for in installments. When Ellie finally fell asleep, they stood in the tiny living room, the weight of everything unsaid crushing the air between them. "Why?" Jack asked, his voice rough. "Why are you here?" She wanted to give him corporate speak, something safe and distant. Instead, she gave him the truth. "Because I'm tired of being my father's daughter. Because I'm tired of living my mother's death. Because when I see you with Ellie, I remember that love isn't weakness, it's the only strength that matters. Because I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me, and I don't care anymore." He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands framing her face, rough and gentle at once. "Olivia," he said, her name a prayer and a warning, "this will destroy you, your father, your world, everything you've built." She laughed, surprising them both. "Maybe it needs to be destroyed. Maybe I need to be." He kissed her then, not the theatrical kiss she'd once offered as an insult, but something real and desperate and transformative. They built something in secret over the following weeks. Not a relationship exactly, that word was too small for what grew between them. It was a rebuilding, a renovation of 2 damaged souls finding ways to fit their broken edges together. She learned to exist in his world of budget, groceries, and playground politics. He learned to navigate hers, though he refused every offer to make his life easier with her money. They fought about pride and independence, and what it meant to accept help from someone you loved. But they also laughed, more than either had in years. Ellie was the bridge, accepting Olivia with the uncomplicated grace of a child who just wanted her father to smile again. The end of secrecy came at the company Christmas party. Arthur had insisted Olivia attend with Harrison Wells, a senator's son with political ambitions and a trust fund larger than some state budgets. She'd agreed to avoid suspicion, planning to make an appearance and leave. But Harrison had been handsy and drunk, and when he'd cornered her on the balcony, suggesting they skip the party for his hotel room, she'd seen Jack across the room, watching. He'd been there as part of the maintenance crew, invisible to everyone except her. Their eyes met, and she saw him start to move, to come to her aid despite the cost. She stopped him with a look, handling Harrison with a knee to the groin that her self-defense instructor would have applauded. But the commotion drew attention, including her father's. Arthur saw her look at Jack, saw Jack's barely controlled rage, and put together what his private investigator had missed. The confrontation was immediate and public. "You're done," Arthur told Jack, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Clear out your locker. You're fired. And if you come near my daughter again, I'll destroy you. No job in this city, no school for your daughter, nothing." Jack stood there, dignity intact despite the humiliation, and looked past Arthur to Olivia. In his eyes, she saw understanding and release. He wouldn't fight for her if it meant dragging her into his destruction. He walked out, shoulders straight, while hundreds of people whispered and speculated. Olivia stood frozen, champagne flute in her hand, watching her father smile with satisfaction. "Now," Arthur said quietly, "you can return to reality. Harrison is still interested, despite your little display." That's when she found her voice, her strength, her mother's courage that had taken 34 years to surface. "No," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm done being your daughter, done living your life, done pretending love is weakness when it's the only thing that makes us human." She set down her champagne, walked past her father's shocked face, past the gaping crowd, past her entire world, burning behind her. She found Jack in the parking garage, packing his tools for the last time. "Where are you going?" she asked. He looked at her, his face a mixture of love and resignation. "Away. Somewhere Ellie won't pay for my choices. Somewhere you can rebuild without me as a reminder of what you lost." "What if," she said, taking his hands, "grease-stained and beautiful, we rebuilt together? What if Ellie got a mother who'd choose her over any boardroom? What if you got a partner who knows that fixing broken things is the most noble work there is? What if we stopped letting other people's fears dictate our love?" He pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "You'd give up everything. The company, the money, the power." She laughed, free for the first time since finding her mother's body. "I'd give up nothing that matters. I'd gain everything that does." The wedding was small. Just Ellie as flower girl, a few of Jack's military friends, and surprisingly, one unexpected guest. Arthur Sterling appeared at the courthouse, older looking, perhaps humbled. He said nothing during the ceremony, but afterward, he approached Jack. "You'll take care of her?" he asked, the question of a father, not a CEO. "With my life," Jack replied. Arthur nodded, handed Olivia an envelope, and left. Inside was a single photo of her mother on her wedding day, glowing with the kind of hope Olivia now understood. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, "Love is only weakness if you choose the wrong person to be strong for." 5 years later, Olivia stood in a different office, smaller, warmer, filled with children's drawings and family photos. Carter Sterling Energy Solutions was a boutique firm specializing in sustainable energy for low-income communities. It would never make Fortune 500, never grace the cover of Forbes, but it mattered in ways Sterling Energy never had. Jack ran the technical side, his military experience and field knowledge invaluable. Olivia handled the business, her corporate connections opening doors that stayed closed to others. They were partners in every sense, rebuilding the world one fixed generator at a time. Ellie, now 12, had just won the state robotics championship. Her robot could navigate any obstacle, finding new paths when blocked, never giving up, just like her father had taught her, just like Olivia had learned. At the celebration dinner pizza, of course, Ellie raised her soda in a toast. "To Mom and Dad," she said. The word mom still knew enough to make Olivia's eyes water. For proving that when something's broken, you don't throw it away, you fix it. Together. Jack reached for Olivia's hand under the table, his wedding ring catching the light. She squeezed back, feeling her mother's ring on her finger, the one she'd found in that envelope from her father. Later that night, after Ellie was asleep, they stood on the balcony of their modest apartment, looking out at Queens rather than Manhattan. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked, pulling her close. "The life you gave up?" Olivia turned in his arms, seeing in his face the same love that had made her brave enough to choose him over everything else. "I didn't give up a life," she said, kissing him with the promise of all their tomorrows. "I fixed one that was broken, with the best maintenance man in the business." He laughed, the sound rich and warm in the night air. "Well, someone once told me if I fixed their generator, they'd kiss me. I'm still collecting on that promise." And in that moment, in that small apartment filled with robot parts and homework and love, Olivia Sterling, now Olivia Carter, understood what her mother had tried to say in that tragic note. Love was indeed weakness if you loved someone who diminished you. But love was infinite strength when you chose someone who saw you whole, broken parts and all, and decided you were worth fixing together.